Hey everybody, today is Monday, January 9th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from All Quiet on the Western Front, editor Sven Budelmann.
I believe in a contract between the audience and the filmmakers, which is set in the first minutes of a film about pace, tonality, and realism. Sometimes we need a break to pull out the audience and give them a rest and a moment of grounding. Then we can cut back into the battle again. Edward and me, we were sitting here. We played the first cue, and it was the cue with this burr, burr, burr. Edward said, "Hey, this sounds like Led Zeppelin. What is that?" And we were like, "Really?"
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, greetings, Rough Cutters. Matt Fury here. Nice to see you again. Nice to meet you if this is your first time checking out the old podcast. No matter how often you've been here, I'll take a minute to remind you that I always like hearing from you. Whether you've got a comment, question, suggestion, dissertation, proclamation, or just a passing whim, I'd love to hear it. There are numerous ways for you to reach out. There's a feedback page on the Rough Cut website where you can write me a message, which overwhelmingly seems to be the preferred method, but you can also leave an audio message, like a voicemail. And that is my favorite way because for once, I get to hear your voice instead of you just having to listen to mine. Anyway, say hello sometime. I always appreciate it. Something else I appreciate is the opportunity to speak with editors who I have not met before. Even better if it's an editor outside of the Hollywood system. Not that I don't love my Hollywood pals, because I do. But let's be honest, they make up about 90% of the interviews we do here. So, good to give the rest of the world a chance to talk about what it's like editing in their particular corner of the world. And today that corner is Berlin. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's in Germany. We visited Berlin on a previous episode of The Rough Cut to talk to the editors of the Netflix series Dark, which was absolutely wonderbar. And as fate would have it, today's guest was actually mentioned on that particular episode. Even though he was not present for that interview, editor Sven Budelmann did cut an episode of that series. You know what else he edited? All Quiet on the Western Front. If that title sounds familiar to you, well, it could be for a few reasons. First, it was a German anti-war novel released in 1929, and then a year later, the first cinematic adaptation of that novel would go on to win the Oscar for Best Picture. So that is another reason why the title could be familiar to you. As for the story itself, All Quiet on the Western Front is set in the closing days of World War I. It tells the tale of an idealistic young German soldier named Paul Bäumer. After enlisting in the German army with his friends, Paul finds himself exposed to the realities of war, shattering his early hopes of becoming a hero as he does his best just to stay alive. Now, there are a few departures from the book in this new film. The film excludes a part of the book where Paul goes home for a short visit while the war is still raging on. On the other hand, the film adds a parallel storyline not found in the book, which follows the armistice negotiations to end the war. Yes, it's a war movie, which means it's not always the easiest thing to watch, but it's a very well done and powerful story. That's my way of saying you really should watch it. Now, I guess there may be a spoiler or two in this interview with Sven, but like I said, it's a war movie. There are no happy endings. Therefore, I think listening to Sven talk about the movie before you've seen it, it's okay. And it'll certainly give you things to think about and look for while you watch the film. Before we do meet up with Sven to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front, please indulge me for a minute or two while I talk to you about the wonderful people who helped to bring you this interview. Of course, that is our pals and Rough Cut sponsor, Extreme Music. Now, one of the first things I asked Sven in this interview is about the score. It's something that really grabs you, which is exactly what you want, and exactly what great music can do for your movie or TV show. And the best people to help you with all that grabbing is Extreme Music. They provide film and TV makers with the very best in production audio, created by the best musicians and composers in the business. Trent Reznor, Mark Mothersbaugh, Michael Giacchino, Hans Zimmer, Quincy Jones, and so many more. All you got to do is go to extrememusic.com and search their enormous catalog of tunes for metadata like genre, tempo, instrumentation, lyrics. And of course, you can even upload a track to Extreme Music, and they will use their amazing musical powers to find you ones like it. You can get your tracks in different links. You can get your tracks with different instruments. You can do it all right there on their website. Or you can talk to one of their friendly reps at an office near you. So the next time you have a big movie or TV show to make, go make it with those musical geniuses at Extreme Music. And now, my friends, we make our way to Berlin, Germany, for we have an appointment to speak with All Quiet on the Western Front editor, Sven Budelmann. Yeah, a real person.
A real person.
Sven, I thought we would start off by talking about something that I usually wait until halfway through the interview at least to bring up, and that is the score. For me, that was the first thing that really jumped out at me as being something so different about this film and its place within the, quote, war genre. Volker Bertelmann's score is like this strange 3-note, distorted techno kind of sound. It really hits you in the face the first time it happens. And then you also have these sort of snare drum punctuations that you use. Mm-hmm. I just want to know about your process about working with Volker and such a unique approach to doing a score for this war film.
I mean, there are two elements. The snare drums actually we invented in the editing room. Edward Berger and me. When we started with a fine cut, I think in the first week, Edward came to the edit and had a little cue of military drum sounds. Drum roll, just single hits and all this. And we were like, okay, what shall we do with this? And he said, yeah, I have something in my head. I can't explain it, but I think this might be interesting to play around with it. And at this time, we were just editing the sequence when the boys meet in front of the school, then they go inside the school, and then the headmaster is holding the speech and tell the young boys that war is great and you come back as heroes. And there we started playing around with this snare drum. And the good thing about the snare drum is we weren't able to make it work with drum rolls or a really military rhythmic thing which goes over several seconds. But then we worked with these single hits, and I added a closing door in addition to the snare hit. And then it got a bit of distorted and it almost felt like a gunshot. And then we thought, okay, this is maybe interesting. Then we have the element of military, plus we create a threat with making it sound a bit like a gunshot. By playing around with this element, we used places where we can destroy the image. This is what we tried all over the place. We have this beautiful village, the boys and hugs and hey, how are you? And then we found like, okay, this is too beauty. We have to destroy it somehow. And then we started like, okay, let's cut one of these snare hits right in the middle of the dialogue. And that's what we did. And then was like, okay, strange, maybe not, but okay, before we get rid of it, let's try it at some other places. And then we felt like, now it's going to develop into a direction that we like. And then when we cut into the building and we start hearing the headmaster talking and we have all these empty rooms, we found like, okay, here we go. Now we can work on transitions and with this additional element of the snare hits and create like a bridge or like a threatening transition into something normal. And this was what really interested us. And from there on, we used these snare hits all over the place, not all over the place, but at some scene transitions to keep this military threat always in the head of the audience.
Going back to the actual motif that Volker did, those 3 notes, very distorted. Mm-hmm. Was that something where he gave you a larger score and you were just working with certain stems?
No, that was different.
Okay.
Volker gave us a huge basket of cues he did for other shows. I think I have 23 hours of music from him. Because Edward Berger worked with Volker before on 2 TV shows. So, I mean, actually, I got this basket from Edward instead of Volker because Edward has it on his computer. So I had his score already, and it was mostly electronic score, really atmospheric. And so I did a layout with his music, actually. So we had a layout for the whole film with his music already. And then we sent a cut to him. And I think it was about a week later that he sent us his first ideas. And what's really nice is the fact that Edward knows Volker and he trusts him. He just said to Volker, okay, do what you want, but make it special and something that we never heard before. I mean, this is typical. Everyone wants to have something new, unique, what you never heard. And I mean, I said, okay, let's give it a try. And actually, Volker came up with something that knocked out of our shoes. And when he sent us his first cues, Edward and me, we were sitting here. We played the first cue, and it was the cue with this burr, burr, burr. And Edward said, hey, this sounds like Led Zeppelin. What is that? And we were like, really? Really? What? And then we kept listening to it, and it was, wow, this is really special and unheard. So I said, wait, I put it in the timeline because it was supposed to go on the journey of the travel of the uniforms in the beginning of the film. And it did exactly what we layouted, but much more cooler and unique. And it was so much better what we could expect. It was great.
Well, I don't know if it sounds like Led Zeppelin, but it absolutely, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, is that it's the first thing that really jumps out at you. Volker did exactly what Edward asked him to do, which is almost impossible, which is come up with something that nobody's ever heard of before.
Yeah.
So not only does Edward know Volker already, he knows you. You cut 6 episodes, I believe, of Deutschland 83. It's a spy TV series.
Yeah.
We also did a TV movie with him. So you guys already had a relationship. What did he tell you about this project and how he wanted it to be similar or different from either the original novel or other previous adaptations that have taken place, like the 1930 film? And I think there was also a TV movie that happened in the 70s.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. I never had this before, but in this case, he sort of prepared me before I started working. When we had talks about tonality, music, and other war films, he asked me to watch some other films. And all these films weren't war films. At the beginning, I didn't understand really why I should watch this film. But after the second or third film, I felt like, okay, all these films have something in common. It was that none of them was sensational, but they still had an extremely intense feeling that was created. For instance, Steve McQueen's Hunger, one of his favorite films, and now it's one of my favorite films, because when I watched it, it was like I felt really bad for hours after watching this film. And there are so many great scenes without trying to be sensational. And this is exactly what he was looking for. He wanted to make it more restrained and not with big orchestral music and action cuts and all that. It should be more like from an observer perspective. And this is, for me, it was really inspiring to watch Hunger, because this is exactly what we were looking for. And I think you can see some elements in All Quiet with this knowledge.
Knowing that there are already adaptations of this novel, do you go back and look at those as well, or do you purposefully stay away from them? I mean, are you going into this project thinking that I want to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's reminiscent of those films, or vice versa? Do you go through and say, well, there are probably things about those films that they got really right from the beginning? I mean, certainly the 1930 film won Best Picture. Are you conscious of those films? I guess I should just ask.
I'm conscious of those films, but I watched them when I was 15 in school, and I decided to not watch them again. I don't know. I made the experience in the last couple of years that sometimes it's better to not watch films that you watched 30 years ago, because sometimes they destroy your memory when you watch it for the first time. And I just made the experience with my daughter when I watch older films, and I was like, okay, let's watch Indiana Jones Part 2. And I'm really excited, and she's not engaged as I am. And I don't understand why this is, because of the visual habits changed that much. And that's why maybe this is the reason why I stayed away from watching these masterpieces, so that I'm still open to create something new.
So something that is different, or is a bit of a departure in your film from the novel, and I admit I have not read the novel, so I'm just going based on information I've absorbed, and that is, in the book, Paul actually goes home. The main character, Paul, has a period where he's able to go home before the war is over, and discovers that he cannot relate to civilians anymore, something that's very common in these in war stories and in, of course, real life. Were those things that Edward even ever had as part of the story, that he might have even shot?
To be honest, I don't know. Short answer, I don't know.
Short answers are fine. They're much better than long questions, I'll tell you that. Okay, well, let's take another approach. As you mentioned, you saw the 1930 film when you were 15. What's remarkable is that film, as well as the TV movie that was made in the 70s, they're made by American filmmakers. And this is a German novel. It's a German story. And your film is the first time it's ever being adapted cinematically from a German perspective. Is that a little intimidating for you as a German editor to tell this very important story for the first time from the German perspective?
Yeah, you're right. This is probably one of the things that interested me most, that we were able to make a new version from a German perspective, from the perspective of the losers, because all the other versions have been shot in English, and now it's going to be in German. And there won't be any heroes, and no glory. So, and what we just wanted to do is show the brutality of war in the most realistic way.
Again, going back to that component of it being from the German perspective, something that fascinated me, and I'm not sure if maybe this was another one of those things you're like, I didn't have a hand in that, I don't know. When I watched it on Netflix, so I didn't watch it with subtitles, I watched it with overdub, and the voices have English accents, not German accents.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Boy, I hope,
What?
As I get older, Sven, my faculties betray me, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. But I'm going to go back and double check before I ever release this podcast. Won't I be embarrassed? But yes, they were. And I thought that was a fascinating choice. Now we have to wonder if it was a conscious choice or not. It's just something that happened. But go check it out.
No, I didn't know that. Actually, this is crazy. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was. I wouldn't call it crazy, but I thought it was an interesting artistic choice.
No, in our version, everyone speaks German.
Well, if I understood German, I would certainly watch it. But as we established when we first greeted each other today, my German is quite limited. How is the film being received in Germany? I know it's Germany's submission for the Academy Award for Best International Feature Film. Mm-hmm. But earlier we were joking about the Netflix series Dark, which you worked on. Mm-hmm. And when I interviewed your co-editors from that series, Anya, Boris, and Simon, I asked them, Dark is very popular around the world. How is it received in Germany? And they said, not well. And I said, really? Why? And they said, it's too German. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, German audiences tend to appreciate more content from foreign markets.
This is true. Yeah, this is true.
Why is that?
Because when you turn on the TV in Germany and you watch the content, there is a reason. Really, it's not. There's nothing. Not often, really, anything that is nice to watch. But the good thing about it is since we have Netflix, and Netflix raised the standards a lot. And so I think the audiences in Germany, they carefully approach again German-made films because they could see that series like Dark and maybe now All Quiet on the Western Front, that there is a way of making good films, even in Germany. And I think, I'm not sure, I heard a lot of good things about Dark. But something else, I can add something. I remember when on the premiere in October, it was really actually interesting because a lot of people approached me, and mostly people from the industry, because this is the audience of a premiere. And they all said it's a great film. It's really great, but I never want to watch it again. And this is something I understand what they were talking about, because when I watched the film, the premiere, the first time, it was my first viewing experience as an audience and sitting in a movie theater. And before that, it was all with my technical eye, with my technical ears. And now I had my wife sitting next to me and my assistant. And my wife asked me to please let me know if there's anything brutal coming up. And then I totally forgot that there's something happening really bad in the next few seconds because I was so pulled into the film that I watched. But this was really a great experience. And I understood the people who told me that they would never want to watch it again because the film is so violent and brutal. And I have never expected this, that the film is that brutal. But yeah, maybe this is also because in this other surrounding, when you sit in a movie theater and nothing distracts you, I was really impressed by the film.
Well, it's a very impressive film. I mean, from an artistic standpoint, it is beautifully executed. Even though it's a German film, I believe much of it, if not all of it, was shot in Prague under some pretty grueling conditions, at least for the wartime components of the film. Mm-hmm. Did you edit on location or back in Germany?
I would love to work on location. This is what I usually do, but I wasn't allowed to. I think the shooting started in February 2021 and in the middle of a COVID peak. So there was no way of getting there or going back from Prague. So the production decided for security reasons that I should work from Berlin, which I did. So I was sitting here and I worked from here and sent my cuts as quick times each evening to Edward. And on the way back from set, in this 1 hour car drive, we talked about the scenes. And I mean, for him, it's always important to be in close contact with me so we can talk about if everything works out. And sometimes we just don't even talk about scenes, just about feelings. How does the material look and how does this character develop? But sometimes we also talk about the cuts. And for me, we are used to do this because also on the other TV shows we did years before, we did it in the same way. I mean, we were lucky. We started the fine cut beginning of June. There wasn't any VEX sign yet, but we both were really careful with everything. I just went from my studio back home. So I just saw my wife and daughter, and the same with him. He just went home and saw his wife, but we both met here in person. But this was the only thing. So we didn't work remotely. I prepared for that because I wasn't sure if we might need to work remotely. So I spent a lot of money to actually set up a Zoom Pro session. I did also a lot of research by trying around with Zoom, Skype video, Hangouts and all this. But we had so much trouble with echo, bad video quality, jerking image, bad sound. Bad sound is even worse than bad picture, I found out. And I had a lot of talks with the Zoom support. And I think at this time, it wasn't a feature yet and you had to ask for it. And so, but they got me in HD for some reason instead of just 720p. And I was able to upstream 1080 and with hi-fi quality. And this worked pretty well. So I used one of these. I have the Avid Artist and XID box, which luckily it works as breakout and break in box, sort of. So I could use the same signal that goes to my big screen back into the box, and I could use that as source for the Zoom. So this was my remote setup, which I used for the film later, and it works perfectly.
So a part of the film that's so impressive is how well you immerse the viewer into that world. I mean, you feel like through the cinematography, through the sound, through your editing, that you are right there with Paul and his friends as they're going through this experience. And as I just mentioned, sound plays a huge part in that. Were you working in 5.1? Because I would think for something like this, to really bring home that environment of being there amongst the artillery and the mortar fire and all those things, that surround sound would be an important thing for you to be working with in editorial.
No, actually, I have a LCR setup. There's one Genelec in the middle and two at the sides. Our sound designer, Frank Kruse, actually, when I set up the studio 10 years ago, I asked him, we never worked before, Frank Kruse, the sound designer of All Quiet and me. We never worked on the same project before, but we were friends. And he helped me to set up this monitor setup, which is really great because it gives you a better feeling for the, that it feels like as in a movie theater, because the dialogue comes from the middle and ambience and music comes from the side. I really love that. And even when the director is next to me, I'm slightly out of the middle, then it still feels like that the dialogue comes from the middle and you don't have to be in the middle exactly. But I never try to work with the surround channel. I'm really curious because I think Eddie Hamilton works in surround. But I never found out how he does it because he sometimes works in the car. And then I asked myself, how does it translate into a surround studio when you first work in stereo?
Well, we'll have to follow up with Eddie and ask him. If it's possible, Eddie will try it. That's for sure. In different markets, the process can be a little different. Mm-hmm. Is there an assembly editor at all? If not in this process, but is that something you find often in German productions, or is that not really what you do there?
No, it's not really what we do here. I always feel responsible that because I have to watch everything, I want to know what they shot. But I had situations in the past that there was an assembly editor, and also I wouldn't call him assembly editor. I mean, like in Dark, for example, I just worked on one episode there, and I took over this episode because they split these 10 episodes, 3 for this guy, 3 for Antje, and 3 for Boris. And this one was a leftover somehow. And there has been some scenes that were assembled already. So I had to take over their cuts. But I still feel that I have to go back to the roots and start watching again the footage. And I think there is a way of taking over assemblies, and I get used to it even more. Half a year ago, I worked on a TV show for NGM, Last Light. And there we had an assembly editor. And even when I don't take over any of the cuts, you can still pull out some learnings out of it, which makes it easier to do selects and watch the footage because you already know what you have to look for. Like when you work on a script, when you have white empty paper, there's nothing to talk about. But as soon there's something, you see, okay, this might work better when we start with the wide shots instead of the close-ups in the beginning, and then you can look for it on the way you do selects.
Well, knowing how you feel about it's my responsibility to really be aware, go back to the roots, I think is what you said. The film, I believe, is like 2.5 hours long. How long was the first assembly and how many hours of footage were you working with?
Yeah, this is a good question. I asked my assistant just today, how many footage did we have? I don't know. I think approximately 2 to 3 hours a day, a shooting day. And then there has been this big battle scenes where we had like 5 or 6 hours, but mostly I think the average is about 2-3 hours per day. Mostly we had 2 cameras, also in the train scene. And, but it's not like that the B camera shot like a close up of the mid shot at the same time. It was more like a complete different setup. Like it's a close up of the pen writing the, what's it called, the name for the treaty?
Armistice?
The armistice, yeah, exactly. So this is not like that I had a choice, that there was any reason to use the multi-group to switch between A and B because it's similar what the cameras show. It's a completely different setup. James French, I mean, he's a brilliant cinematographer, and everything was really properly, beautifully set, and the camera was not moving. Everything was just on tripod, especially in the train, and perfectly composed frames. And it happens that there was like a 2-minute take. And for the first 1 minute, I was just seeing an empty wall. And then I was like, okay, what is it about? And then suddenly, now there's this guy steps into frame and there he has his line. And therefore it was perfect. But it's not like they were fishing around with the B camera. What else can we get? Nothing like that.
Well, I love asking editors about the open of their film because that is such a crucial component of the film, getting it off on the right foot. That's no different here with All Quiet. The film starts off with not the main character, but just another unnamed German soldier going through battle, losing his life, and then his uniform gets passed on and then ultimately in the hands of the main character, Paul. And you mentioned the headmaster and just getting his students riled up that, go off to war and be a hero. It's an honorable thing to do. And the boys are all excited about what they're walking into. But that does not last long. You don't spend a lot of time building up backstory about Paul or his friends, really just opening with that battle sequence of this unnamed soldier right to the exuberance of joining the effort. And then day one, it's all gone and it's just the horrors of war. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how that open might have been reworked, maybe if there was more time spent with the boys before joining the war, or the opening sequence that sort of brings us into the war without Paul involved in it at all.
Actually, it was scripted this way, but we spent a lot of time in the first 10 minutes, especially because I believe in a contract between the audience and the filmmakers, which is set in the first minutes of a film about pace, tonality, and realism. And as soon you set these rules, you should stick to it somehow. And there we made sure that the pace is as slow as it is and that we have these almost documentary style nature images, which really pulls you out of the story. And we played around, especially in the first 2-3 minutes, about how long do we need the silence in the beginning to give the audience a rest, sit down in front of their TV or in the movie theater and eat the last popcorn, and then they need to be attracted, and then they slowly dive into the film. We played around with this a lot, and we had another version of the foxes in the beginning. Usually it was scripted like that. We see the beautiful, cute foxes, and then we hear like thunders in the background, which were actually explosions that come closer and closer. And suddenly the fox den explodes, which was the first shocking moment, like, oh, this beautiful nature now got destroyed by the bad war. And then we start again with this top shot, tracking shot, when the camera goes down into the battlefield and we don't know really what we're looking at, and then it pans up and we see we're in the middle of a battlefield, and then the shooting starts, and then there is another shocking moment when another explosion in front of the camera is really loud, and then we jump into the trench. But we thought that this is we played with this gimmick too often, being quiet, and then suddenly a shocking moment. And we did it two or three times. The third time is when the soldier takes his shovel and then he hits the French soldier, and then we cut to the titles. And we thought we can't do that as often. This is just too much. So this was something we played around a lot to balance out how you get into the movie. Then we have this really slow pace journey of the travel of the uniforms, when the bodies get undressed and the train gets unloaded and the lorry goes to the factory and the woman cleans the uniforms. And then we see Paul for the first time. And this is actually interesting. We had a reshoot for one day. And this one shot when he drives on his bike is one of the shots that we we did a reshoot with this. Because usually it was before that he just came into town, into the village and joins the group of his friends. But at this moment, we weren't really sure if this is our main character. That's why we had to have another close-up of him driving on the bike before he joins the group in front of the school. And from there on, I think we follow the script. We go with this group into the battle into the trenches. And this is not what they expected. So war is really bad. Then there's this bomb attack, and his friend Ludwig, the one with the glasses, got killed. And then there is this time jump when we are like 1 year later. They are going to steal the goose. And this is a moment when actually the introduction of the boys begins. There hasn't been any introduction before, so we don't know them yet. And this is the most challenging part in the whole film, because here we had to create the intimacy to care about these boys. Before that, it was just, we were just watching the war machinery doing its thing. We just like observers of these people. And here we learn about the desires and the dreams of the boys. And this is the only sequence where you feel a bit of positive energy and that there might be a happy ending, which we all know that they will probably all die. And this is something where we spend a lot of time to figure out how much do we need of positive moments here and when can we send those guys into the battle again.
Well, that's really interesting to hear you talk about how you introduce those boys. You know, considering the popularity of the film, along with that comes a lot of analysis. Everyone's trying to figure out the meaning behind a lot of things. And one note that I found pointed out that Paul and his friends, as they're marching together at the beginning of the film and singing together, we see them in order of how they die. I'm sorry for the spoiler. It's a war movie. People die. That's how it works. But things like that, that level of detail, are you really conscious of that? Are you really concentrating on making sure that as filmmakers, not just as the editor, that we want to introduce these boys into the camera frame in the order that they are unfortunately going to meet their demise?
No, I don't think so. I think, as you said, it's a war movie and probably everyone will die. I mean, maybe as an audience, you have the hope that maybe at least Paul will survive this film, but it doesn't. I have a good friend, another director, and at the end of the premiere, he told me it's a great film. But he wasn't the one who said, I don't want to watch it again. He said, like, it was really hard for me to watch because I knew just from the beginning, this is a body count. And this is what was just too hard because he knew that he sits there and just need to watch how each of them dies one by one.
I want to jump back a little bit to when we were talking about multiple cameras and you said, well, the B camera, it's not like it was just a different angle on the same thing. It was something possibly totally different. I love to hear about how editors organize not just the material, but keep track of the story and the methods that they use for charting the arc of the story, whether it's something very organic like 3x5 cards on a wall, or maybe they have a system in the Avid that they use. What tools, what techniques do you use to manage the story and the media together?
I used to use these cards like little printouts from the thumbnails to use as a placeholder for each scene. And I had a board here on the left, and then we played around with the structure. And we started without the board, but then we came to the point that we played around with the structure of Berger, the one, the character that Daniel Brühl is playing. Because this was also one of the elements that hasn't been in the novel, and we didn't know yet exactly where to put these. When is the right moment to introduce Berger? And do we want to have like a longer stretch of Edward Berger, like 2, 3, 4 scenes in a row, and then cut back to the boys, or do we want to split it even more? And we used several test screenings, I think 3 or 4 test screenings to play around with this to see which structure works better. And this was a moment when we put up like these walls and played around with the structure. This was just about this storyline. Everything else, I mean, we had a very good script, so it worked out as it was scripted. So we were glad that we didn't need it anymore. And in terms of the multicam structure, I'm in Avid, I'm always using this bin view with thumbnails, and I make my assistant line up a placeholder for A, B, or C camera in the beginning, and then just next to it, the groups of all the takes. For me, this is the most visual way of working. And I mean, everyone can do what they want, but I'm not so good with reading, and I'm more a visual guy and want to see a picture. Then I know exactly what I could expect behind it.
That makes perfect sense to me. Earlier, I was talking about the immersive nature of the film. The camera is often behind Paul, following Paul. Since I was so used to you following Paul closely, when it would go to a wide shot, I would feel something bad was about to happen. Like the frame was expanded because now I'm making room for something to literally blow up in your face. Is there any psychology like that you employ in making decisions editorially? Like, I'm going to go to a wide shot right before something horrible is about to happen, or am I just way overthinking all this?
But interesting approach, Matt, really. But no.
Thank you for saving me, Sven.
It started a bit earlier, all this. I mean, way before the principal photography, we did a mood trailer. And this mood trailer was about expressing the tonality of the film. And so we used beautiful images of nature and destroyed those with a destructive, increasing score. And we immediately loved the tension that was created by this combination of violence and moment and silence. And so this is something, and we knew that we wanted to keep this feeling in the film somehow, but we didn't know how yet. But after a while, or when we cut the first battle scenes, we felt like this is a really intense and really brutal everything. And sometimes we need a break to pull out the audience and to give them a rest and a moment of grounding. And then we can cut back into the battle again. We need a tool to control the dynamics of these moments of violence and moments of silence. Therefore, we had the nature scenes and the wide shots. So the wide shots weren't exactly meant to be like something bad is going to happen. It was more like a moment of relaxing. And we wanted to have it like a documentary. And I always feel like when you see one of these wide shots and you see these little ants going across the battlefield, for me, this is like this typical observer perspective, and like you have in animal documentaries, and there's a big landscape, and somewhere in the background there's a deer running or something. I think this was our idea of controlling the balance of brutality and give the audience a rest.
Well, what can I say, Sven? Wide shots make me nervous. I'm a very anxious person. There are many standout moments in the film, but there's one in particular that I wanted to ask you about, and that is a scene closer towards the end where Paul is in hand-to-hand combat with a French soldier in a crater that a bomb has created. And Paul stabs the soldier and then goes through these feelings of regret and remorse, and just instead of trying to defeat his enemy, is now trying to comfort and care for him. The scene is actually sort of shot, it seems like, in real time. Paul jumps in, he stabs the guy, crawls away, realizes he's still alive, starts to get out of the crater, then gets shot at, and then crawls back, yells at the dying French soldier, and then, as I said, tries to care for him. There was not a lot of cutting going on there. And I just wanted to know, is that a less is more approach for you, in that I just want to let this play out like a real moment? I don't want to be manipulating this any more than I have to.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It's interesting that you pointed out this scene. This is probably one of the most crucial scenes in the film, I think. Paul kills the French soldier with his bare hands and must witness how he dies a long, agonizing death. And I still remember when I watched the first take, I was truly affected and felt uneasy for hours after watching it. The whole scene exposes the brutal nature of war, and the lost humanity in such clarity that it was hard for me to bear. And my first instinct was to let it all play out in a one take, because the performance was so strong. I couldn't imagine to do any cuts because I would probably destroy anything. But it turned out that we had tons of great footage. So we spent a lot of time to bring out the best performances and tickle out every detail to make the scene as compelling as possible. And our intention was also to play out the scene in real time, so without shortening anything. So the audience has to experience the same emotional development that Paul goes through with no way of escaping. And after that intense scene, we felt like that we need a break to give a rest and moment of grounding. So we pulled out the audience by cutting to one of these great epic shots, like similar with the nature scenes that we used as contrast to create distance, to balance out violence in moments of silence. And it was clear to us that we have to embrace every little positive moment in between all this brutality. And at the end of this scene, when we think that the battle is over, we cut back to Paul, and there's one of these rare moments of hope when you think, okay, maybe the war is over and he survived. And I mean, for me, this is a really intense scene. And when I watched first, I called Edward immediately, and it was like, okay, this is really hard to watch what you just shot there.
I'm glad you brought that up. Just the emotional and mental toll that a project can take on an editor. I mean, if you're doing a romantic comedy or an action thriller or a superhero movie, I don't know that you go home feeling the same way and being impacted the same way. When you work on a war picture like this, something that's very brutal and personal and also important to the nation that you come from, does it weigh on you? Is it hard for you to leave it at work? And when the project is over, did you sort of like, well, I really, really need a break because what I just went through making this film took a toll on me?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And this is actually what happened, even if I wasn't aware of it while I was working on it. I think I have gray hair now, and this happened actually last year when we cut this film. I know, it is really intense. And I mean, the approach, when I start working on a scene, the main battle scene, we see the guys sitting in the trench and there's this tank going across them. And then, I mean, when we start editing, there's the board in the beginning, and then we see them screaming, and then there's a cut. And when I build the scene together and I see how it grows the scene by choosing the right takes, combining them, adding sounds, I see how it builds up and the scene creates an emotion. And then my gut feeling tells me that I'm on the right way. But this gut feeling that I have is a real emotion that I have. And each time when I watch the scene, it really, I don't know how to say it, it really got me. And I think when I watch it a couple of times, I think this does something to me as a person.
I would have to imagine, and I don't think it's possible to close a discussion about a war film on a lighter note, but I'm going to try. We've talked a lot about sound and the impact it has on the viewer. When you get to the credits, the main part of the credits at the end, it's over complete silence. There is no score.
Yes.
And I'd like to know the decision-making behind doing that in All Quiet.
Usually at the end of films, as soon when the end credits start, you have score. And this is probably like a 9-minute piece, and it's a mashup of all best moments of score. But we felt like that this is not the right approach for an important film like this to end on such a positive note somehow. We thought that it might be good that the audience need to sit in the movie theater and think about what they just saw. And we wouldn't give them any help. No, this is not right. But it would have been easier to sit to finish the film with music at the end. And I think it's harder to watch it without anything because you just feel naked, and it's just more intense feeling after it.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying, where you don't want to let the audience off the hook.
Exactly, yeah.
You want to make sure they feel the full impact. Like the feelings that you have are honest, authentic feelings, and you should live with them for a few minutes after this film.
Yeah, just a few minutes, yeah.
Well, in that silence, as I was feeling all this and watching the credits, I always like to look for something unique that jumps out at me in the credits, some kind of role that's different than I'm used to seeing, or just anything. And something I noticed was Editor Sizzle Reel by Martin Schenk. And I just wondered if that was, you mentioned earlier that you did a test trailer. Mm-hmm. Was that what this is? Or is Martin Schenk doing something totally different with this amazing Editor Sizzle Reel?
Marty Schenk is a real person and is a good friend of mine.
What a relief.
We just went to lunch today.
Oh, no kidding. Tell him I said hi.
No, this is something I last year in October, I had to go to my parents' place because my mother was in hospital. So I worked from there remotely. And Marty sat here in my studio and worked with Edward. So we had 4 or 5 days, and Edward wanted to try out some things, and I was working parallel at my parents' place. That's why he got this credit. I don't know, what does it say? Scissor reel?
Editor Sizzle Reel.
Really? Okay, no, this is actually not what you did, but okay.
I can see what you mean about not wanting to watch the film again. You didn't know it was an English overdub, and you didn't know it said Editor Sizzle Reel. The film, as you said, it's not an easy watch. It is a war film, and it's a true story. And it's a hard movie to watch, but it's a beautiful movie to watch. And you and Edward and Volker and even Sizzle Reel editor Marty Schenk just did an amazing job.
Thank you. You're really kind, Matt. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talk to you again.
Make another great movie, and we can talk again.
I do my best.
No, I have no doubt we will be speaking to Sven in the future, because of course he's going to make another great movie. All Quiet on the Western Front is a great movie. As Sven mentioned, it's not always easy to watch, but life isn't always easy. Making a great movie isn't easy. But this is an expertly crafted film and a wonderful example of using art to examine humanity in all its glory and tragedy. I hope you watch it, and I hope it stirs something in you, as any good movie should. A big thanks to Sven, not just for his brilliant work on the film, but also for making a little time to talk to us about it. So here we are in 2023, some of us still clinging to recently made resolutions. Maybe one of yours was to learn more about Avid Media Composer. Maybe it wasn't. But there is always something to learn about the most relied upon editing system in TV and filmmaking. Not just in Hollywood, but in Germany, India, England, and maybe a few other places. No matter where you make your movies or TV shows, check out all that's new in Media Composer and see what new tools you can add to your editorial bag of tricks today. Just try that little link I put in the show notes to help you with that. Well, that's it from here. Time for me to be all quiet. I hope you have a great week. I hope you get a lot done, have some fun, all that stuff. Until the next time we meet, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.